there's been a reoccurring thought in my head, and I hinted at this thought when I made the first video on Notes on Process and Reality by Alfred North Whitehead, and that I hinted at this idea that I believe that the initial subjective aim that is provided to every actual occasion in the organic philosophy scheme is analogously the felt uneasiness in human action described in Misesian praxeology. Now, I would like to explore what Ludwig von Mises had to say about God uh, in a praxeological sense in his book Human Action. So, in his book Human Action, he says scholastic philosophers and theologians, and likewise theists and deists of the age of reason, conceived an absolute and perfect being, unchangeable, omnipotent, and omniscient, and yet planning and acting, aiming at ends, and employing means for the attainment of these ends. But action can only be imputed to a discontented being, and repeated action only to a being who lacks the power to remove his felt uneasiness once and for all at one stroke. An acting being is discontented and therefore not almighty. If he were contented, he would not act, and if he were almighty, he would have long since radically removed his discontent. For an all-powerful being, there is no pressure to choose between various states of uneasiness. He is not under the necessity of acquiescing in lesser evils. Omnipotence would mean the power to achieve everything and to enjoy full satisfaction without being restrained by any limitations. But this is incompatible with the very concept of action. For an almighty being, the categories of ends and means do not exist. He is above all human comprehension, concepts, and understanding. For the Almighty Being, every means, quote, renders ultimate services. He can apply every means, quote, for the attainment of any ends. He can achieve every end without the employment of any means. In the essay Praxeology, Who Needs It by Roderick Long, where he does a cross-examination between Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises, he had to say this. Rand's other chief objection to Mises's remarks about motivation is his suggestion that all human action is motivated by felt uneasiness. Perhaps Mises was led to this view via the reflection that action always involves a preference for altering the existing situation, and such a preference seems equivalent to dissatisfaction. But as Robert Nozick points out, the goal of an action is not necessarily preferred to the current situation, but rather is preferred to what would obtain if the action weren't done. Hence, an action can be performed to maintain an existing situation rather than to alter it, and the situation to be maintained can itself be an action or a series of actions, including that process of self-sustaining and self-generated action that Rand identifies as the ultimate basis of value. Properly understood, then, praxeology does not imply the preference for inactivity that Rand rightfully characterized as nirvana worship. Now, to tie this back to theology, we'll hear what Roderick Long has to say about this reconceptualization of praxeology and the nature of human action has for Ludwig von Mises's argument against God. Hear this. Ayn Rand opened up Pandora's box with her Nirvana worship comment that it ironically allows praxeologically for the existence of some sort of God. And luckily for us, Alfred North Whitehead has conceived of a God that not only is consistent with praxeology, but exemplifies and explains such a mysterious part of praxeology that seemingly praxeologists cannot quite understand, which is still the issue of where the hell is this felt uneasiness coming from? If it's such a universal value that we must alleviate our felt uneasiness, or not rather now that we have recontextualized it as preserving and maintaining felt easiness, we know that this must be a value, but it's not necessarily or directly arising from us, since we do not have control over it. Remember, value is subjective, and our values are subjective to us, and therefore they are controlled by us. However, if we are not in control of this universal felt uneasiness value, but value also still must be subjective, where is it subjectively coming from? Alfred North Whitehead presents an explanation for this with his theology. On page 32 of Process and Reality, Whitehead says, God's immanence in the world in respect to his primordial nature is an urge towards the future based upon an appetite in the present. Appetition is at once the conceptual valuation of an immediate physical feeling, combined with the urge towards realization of the datum conceptually prehended. For example, thirst is an immediate physical feeling integrated with the conceptual prehension of its quenching. Appetition is an immediate matter of fact, including in itself a principle of unrest involving realization of what is not and may be. The imminent occasion thereby conditions creativity so as to procure in the future physical realization of its mental pole, according to the various valuations inherent in its various conceptual prehensions. All physical experience is accompanied by an appetite for or against its continuance. An example is the appetition of self-preservation, but the origination of the novel conceptual prehension has, more especially, to be accounted for. Thirst is an appetite towards a difference, towards something relevant, something largely identical, but something with a definite novelty. Okay, so here's my point. We can now identify the felt uneasiness in human action more accurately and more properly as appetition towards an urge of self-realization. This both resolves the issue of nirvana worship because appetition is not only about alleviating dissatisfaction, but also procuring satisfaction and maintaining satisfaction. And also, we can say that it must be confidently God doing this work, giving us this divine gift of appetition, because it is, of course, appetition is a value. How else could it not be such a value? And if it's a universal value that arises out of us, then it must be a value from another being. Who else can we call this being but God? We can further say that Whitehead actually satisfies some things that Mises would have contentions with if he were still alive today. Mises conceives of God as Abrahamic, if God was to be real. However, Whitehead's God is not all-powerful, nor is he unchanging, but rather we have a changing God that is ever-changing with the world and is immediately and imminently involved in the world, and also we have a God that is not so powerful, since it only has a lure of persuasion for life to realize and flourish, rather than absolute tyrannical power, where God controls all the subjects and individuals in the world in an evasive and aggressive way. Merely Whitehead's God is just a persuasive force. It cannot actually compel any being to do anything, nor can God rewrite the laws of nature. For laws in the organic scheme arise out of the individual decisions of all the actual occasions in the universe. In other words, it satisfies Ayn Rand's idea that laws need to emerge out of the entity first. And of course, as a friendly reminder, actual entity and actual occasions are analogous and equivalent. The God in Whitehead's scheme is merely just a conditioner for creativity and sets the standard for appetition. I think that's it for this video. If you have anything to say, please let me know down in the comment section below. We can have a conversation. And if you liked this video, you can give it a like. And if you want to see more of my content, you can subscribe. Have a good day.